Welcome to the Nordic Mythology podcast. I'm Daniel Farrand of the company Horns of Odin. As always, before we jump into the show, I do have to plug our Patreon. As I say every week, is how we keep the lights on, is how we keep the podcast going week in, week out. So if you can pop over to Patreon/Nordic Mythology podcast, starts from £3 a month. That's like buying me or Mags a cup of coffee each month. So it's pretty relatively inexpensive and you get a lot for it. You get our bonus show that we do every week in the form of a Q&A, and you get the entire back catalogue from when you sign up. You get access to our Discord server. You get to watch the live shows and join the chat. We're now testing a new show where we read Viking smutty literature and go through and look at the accuracies of it, the inaccuracies, and rate some of the smut, I guess, too. The second episode of that we're going to do today, which is a little lighthearted. It's just a fun show. And if you can't support on Patreon, a 5-star rating, positive review wherever you get your podcasts. And I think that's it. Let's get into today's show. So first, I'm joined by my lovely co-host and in-house archaeologist, Mags Havgar.
Hello.
Hello. And then our guest today is returning with your last appearance on September 2020, I think it was. So it's been 5 years since we last spoke. Episode 26, all the way back then. So our guest today is Arngrimur Vidalin, who is Associate Professor of Old Norse Icelandic Literature at the University of Iceland School of Education. His research has mostly focused on monsters, proto-racism, and dehumanized others. He is currently working on a monograph titled Black Blåmenn and Racism in Medieval Scandinavia, as well as a research project on peripheral humanity with his 3 PhD students. Arngrimur, thank you for joining us again.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, it's been a good while. When I looked back, I was like, I know it was an early one when you were on. And then I looked, I was like, 26, that's actually really early. That was a long time ago.
I've mostly been focusing on similar things all this time. But yeah, it's a lot of water under the bridge. I think it was an adjunct back then.
Yeah, I think you just released were you about to release the Old Norse?
Oh yeah, the Old Norse for modern times.
That was it. I don't know if you've seen it, Mags. It's old.
No.
It's modern phrases in Old Norse.
Okay, why do I not have this is my question, actually, to that.
I've got some that we sell on the website. We'll send you one.
Okay, plug. Go to Horns of Odin.
yeah, well, that was an accidental plug. It wasn't on purpose-ish, maybe. But we're going to cover, I think we should probably get straight into it as well, quite a heavy topic, because when it comes to racism, especially around the Viking Age, modern day paganism, people who are interested in all this, the topic of racism is so heated, I guess, because it is mixed in with, certain right-wing characters who use a lot of this stuff, and a lot of very left-leaning people are into this. So you get this mix of just inaccurate information. And when it comes to, I guess, different races and cultures in the Viking Age, or at least around that time, it's so complex. And I don't know what we really do and don't know, but people use like loaded terms and inaccuracies where they can to try and fight their own side, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and I mean, one of the most prominent misuses these days is how, North American neo-Nazis claim sort of like this is our country because Vikings came to Vinland around the year 1000. Therefore, immigrants leave, Native Americans fuck off. This is Viking country, and we can see a lot of these same tropes all over with Norse enthusiasts, and it's kind of interesting that, of course, enthusiasts of anything can always be racist. I mean, there are probably racist Formula One fans, and 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 my job these days is looking at racism in the literature that these racist fanboys like. But they're probably not even aware that it's there because they're not even focusing on the same things. They just think Viking is big, white, muscular, heroic type with tattoos and hipster hairdos. Whereas what I'm looking at is I'm going deep into just every single bit of literature that was ever written in medieval Iceland, and not even narrowing my scope to Iceland. I'm looking beyond to Britain, to continental Europe, and wherever my fancy takes me, really. As you can see behind me, I have ancient Greek texts, Latin texts, Old English texts as well. Wow. So I read everything pretty much. And and it actually didn't come so much as a surprise to me that to find racist descriptions of, or if you will, proto-racist descriptions of racialized others in sagas and other texts. And because it never made sense to me that racism is something that was invented in the 18th century and just didn't exist before that.
Sure. So when you use the term proto-racism, like what does that mean in the way that you're using it?
Yeah. So until 25 years ago, the consensus amongst historians was that you couldn't use terms like race or racism for time periods before the invention of the race taxonomical system. And so therefore medieval people, ancient people, they would not have been able to racially categorize each other because they didn't think in terms of race. And this has been debunked quite intensely these last 2 decades, really showing that when the race taxonomy came to be, it was just a new pseudoscientific means of categorizing thoughts that people had for millennia already. And among these prominent scholars who have shown that you can definitely talk about racism from the earliest known sources is philosopher Ron Mallon. And so he talks about this idea as a conceptual break hypothesis. So that when the concept race came to be, then there is a conceptual break in the thinking and mentalities of people. And he, having then defined this conceptual break hypothesis, he slaughters it pretty much.
I love that.
And he does it with ease. And I have here with me some books to show as examples of what people have been doing. This is Benjamin Isaac with the invention of racism in classical antiquity. Excellent book. And then we have Origins of Racism in the West. And Geraldine Hang, The Invention of Race in the European Middle Ages. And
I mean, at least from the little knowledge that I have, that I'm very happy that literature exists, because that definitely tracks, at least with my knowledge of the different time periods. Also, that I love kind of the modern whatchamacallit, kind of tendency to say that, well, since we didn't have a word for this concept before this thing, then people can't have acted these ways before then. We have to have had the word first or the concept first before it even became a thing in society, which, I would say racism isn't the only thing that I would apply to.
Yeah, it's kind of like an extreme version of the Sapir-Whorf hypothesis um, on how language works, like that old myth that the Inuit people have many more words for snow than anybody else, as if a person who had never seen snow before couldn't experience it and describe it. So that just doesn't make sense. And I mean, the latest acquisition of mine is this book that I'm reading currently by Asa Mittman, Cartographies of Exclusion, about anti-Semitic mapping in the Middle Ages. So these things are just coming out. This came out just this year. So it's just everything's changing rapidly. And to my knowledge, I am only one of a handful of people looking at racism in Old Norse literature specifically. And so my the book that I'm working on, working title Black, is this particular figure of Blåmenn, or Blåmaður in the singular, which literally would mean a blue man. But it more certainly would just refer to a dark-skinned man. And the first thing that I figured out was that this term can mean several different things, and sometimes at once. So in the earliest uses of this word, we find it as a direct translation in in hagiographies. So we have them in Latin, and then they're translated into Old Norse. This is before the sagas were written first.
Oh, it's that early. Okay.
And so they take the Latin word for Ethiopian, and they translate that as Blåmaður. But the thing with the word Ethiopian is not used for an Ethiopian in the hagiographies. It's used for a demonic entity.
Oh, lovely.
And they are black. They sometimes have wings and fiery eyes and things like that. And usually the story goes that the saint is exorcising these demons or Blåmenn from idols. And then gradually this word starts to appear in sagas, denoting some monstrous, dark-skinned figures from faraway countries.
In the Latin sense, do we know which comes first? As in, is the word for like a dark-skinned demon originate first, and then that's applied to Ethiopians, or is it the other way around? Is it possible to know that?
It's the other way around. We have the word for Ethiopian used in antiquity to denote exactly that. Although in that time Ethiopia was considered by Europeans to be pretty much all of Africa south of the Sahara.
I was about to ask that. Is there a reason why it's Ethiopia specific? But is that more that was just a general term at the time?
Yeah, and this is also the meaning of the word Blåmaður in so many cases. But then also it starts to also mean Saracen, Muslim, Arab, all at the same time, because Icelanders, they can't tell the difference. And so now it's also all of North Africa who are Blåmenn. The people of Mauritania are also Blåmenn. People of India, which is, I'm now investigating the exact geographical meaning of terms like India, Africa, Blauland, the land of the blue people. that are used in Old Norse, because it seems that these terms are like the term Blåmother itself. They are not firmly, but yeah, I mean they're not fixed. So, for instance, I noticed in one text that the Gaza Strip belongs to Blauland. So they're speaking of the kingdom of Solomon, which describes pretty much the exact same kingdom as in the Bible, which is modern day Israel and some ways into Iraq. But that kingdom ends at the border of the Gaza Strip, and there Blauland begins. So,
Interesting.
so we have all these really different meanings of the word depending on what kind of text we are reading.
Is it that it's just a umbrella term for anybody who's the other, or like from a different area? Do we ever see it applied to, I guess to any lighter skinned cultures, or is it specifically only for darker skinned? I was just wondering whether if it was like just a term for like those people over there that we don't really quite understand.
Yeah, well, it can mean a lot of different things, and sometimes Blaumenn are not necessarily all that much darker than we are. Like, for instance, Arabs. And then in one particular text, like Heimskringla, for some reason, places Blaumenn up in the northeast, east of Karelia, somewhere maybe Siberia, something like that. And in that case, we know almost nothing. Like, why are there Blåmenn there, and what does Blåmother mean to the author of this text?
Right.
And so, yeah.
Because I assume it would be an easy. How do I want to phrase this? I guess an assumption that I immediately had, which I then recognize is a very like modern stereotypical thought perhaps to have, is that the term perhaps could be used to apply to anyone with different physical features than we're used to seeing in our day today. But again, what am I basing that on, kind of, besides just what you said right now? So again, yeah, it comes back to, I suppose, what do we know about the author? What would be the author's intention with using this specific term?
Yeah, exactly. That's I mean, his world description is different from most others, so it seems like he hasn't had access to other descriptions of the world in Old Norse. And I mean, the author is most often assumed to be Snorri Sturluson, and he is also, by most scholars, considered to have not had any formal education and not be able to read Latin, for instance. But yeah, so it's kind of strange that he talks about the greater Sweden, which is not Sweden at all. It's what medieval people called Scythia, is a huge landmass in Eastern Europe and Asia. And so he places dragons and Blåmenn there, for instance. And it's kind of interesting also that we have in several other sagas like Fornaldarsögur taking place in the northernmost parts of Norway and Finland. And in these sagas, we often have so-called Finns that probably represent the Sami, and they are often called dark or sometimes black. And if you go even farther to the east, to Karelia and beyond, a region they called Bjarmaland, then most of the people you find there are just monstrous trolls that you have no qualms about the hero just killing for fun.
Right.
Mhm.
And so that's another thing about these racialized others, that they are there mainly to serve as something different from the hero, who is supposed to be whiter, more Nordic. Um, Even though sometimes the sagas explicitly state that they are related to those racialized others, like a particular hero whose name is literally half troll, that's his nickname. And then when his son brings home a Sami woman that he wants to marry, the father says, "It's awful that you want to marry that troll."
Okay.
And so
Huh.
these so-called trolls are just there for heroes to butcher and steal food from, and other things like that. And another term often associated with Blåmenn also is troll. And things get even more complicated here, because as complicated as a Blaumother term is, the word troll is even more complicated, because it does not mean what we, the modern audience, think that it means. It's not, the
Mm-hmm.
cute Norwegian troll figures with the puffy hair and big noses.
Mhm.
It's
Mm-hmm.
nothing like that. It can be anything. It's something evil always. It can be a sorcerer. It can be a revenant. Uh, it has always connection to black magic and the supernatural. It can mean a humongous, sort of humanoid but monstrous creature that eats people, and
Mhm.
so on. And trolls can be Blåmenn. So that's how I got into this to begin with. It was never my intention to go into race studies as such, but I've always been fascinated by the supernatural and by monsters, and this I realized was something that there was not much work that had been done on.
Okay. I have a question, and I don't know if there is going to be an answer to this, and I'm going to try and phrase it the best I
Mhm.
can. So bear with me. We've spoken on the podcast a few times about, like, particularly when it comes to human sacrifice, what constitutes being a human in the Viking Age, medieval age. But around that time period, what would we constitute as a human? And we've had some really good discussions when it comes to human sacrifice. How can it be a human sacrifice if the people sacrificing them don't actually consider the person to be
Mhm.
human? And is that maybe a case here where our Blauman seen to be a human? And it's so difficult to put ourselves in the mind of somebody, 1,000 years ago or 800 years ago. But obviously, we now know through years of science and understanding and just evolution that we just have different skin colors, but we're all human. We're all come from the same point, and everyone's the same. But I assume that knowledge doesn't exist back 800 years ago. I assume it doesn't. So are they then looking at people who look so different to they do? And do we know whether there is that connection that it's like, oh, I'm just a light skinned version of what you are. We're both humans. We both have the same origin. Or are they looking at somebody who looks completely different to them and they're going, oh, you're just not the same as me? Because I think they're both, one is more evil than the other.
Mm.
If you look at it and say, oh, we're both humans, you're just a different skin color than me, so I'm going to consider you less than, that I would say is more evil than not quite understanding that we're both humans. Because I guess there would be a fear aspect if you genuinely was like, oh, I've met somebody who looks kind of like me but not like me, and you genuinely think that is like a monster, that's different to then. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and this is actually what my research project, Peripheral Humanity, is about. Although I
cool.
probably shouldn't be talking too much about that project because I just handed in the application a second time, and I will only know in January if I get funded. And
well,
yeah.
First of all, good luck with the application process. Fingers crossed.
And yeah, so the question is, because there has been so much studies on dehumanization and about sort of what it means to be a monster, and so I wanted to flip this around, and I'm wondering, what does it take to make you human? What sort of qualities do you have to possess? Which ones can you strip away to make somebody less than human or inhuman? And one thing about what I'm seeing in these texts is that sometimes it's an absolute sort of monstrification of people's, where they are not really described as people. They are just abominations, really. Like people who, like some people don't have a head. They have a face in their chest instead. And these are actually, they are called blemmies in Latin, and they are kind of related to Blåmenn, which is another complicated issue. And then we have also monsters who have only the single foot and they jump around on it. And we find that this monster pops up in the Vinland stories. But originally, these are derived from Pliny the Elder's natural history, written in the 1st century. And so I would say that these are, in these instances, you're not acknowledging any human aspect to these people. They are just monsters. But when it comes to the Blåmenn, I think usually they do realize that they are human. Because here's the kind of irony in the whole thing. In order to be able to dehumanize someone, you have to acknowledge that they are human at the same time that you are denying their humanity. Because if you look at a cockroach and you call it a cockroach, that's not really offensive, is it? But if you call a human a cockroach, you are really first acknowledging their humanity and then taking it away from them in order to demean and belittle. And I think this is the case in so many instances with Blåmenn. There's this theme that is really strange. And it reminds me of colonialism, even though they hadn't really, invented that per se yet. As in, they are often captured somewhere, somehow, and then they are given as presents to kings. And so we have this, there's this one, so there's this one type of saga we call contemporary sagas. They're written about the people while they're still alive. And one of these is Hákonar saga Hákonarssonar, the king Hákon of Norway. And this saga is written by Sturla Þórðarson, Snorri's nephew. And so he was asked personally by the king to write his biography while he was alive. And in that saga, he notes that some men came to the court of the king, saluted him, and they had a present. And the present was 2 Blåmenn. And that's it, no explanation. This bit of the story is just over. But then we have fictionalized narratives where the hero, who has offended the king, as so often happens when Icelanders go and meet people abroad, we tend to not have the best manners. And
I would say that applies to a larger part of Northern Europe as well.
I would say the Brits are the worst at it. I think we take the biscuit when it comes to being bad tourists. I think we can
yeah, wasn't
agree.
there something like Amsterdam advertising, people of Britain do not come?
Yeah, I saw a little meme the other day of listing all the countries in order of how bad they are at tourism, and I knew before I even looked at it, I was like, yeah, the British are at top. I know we are. We're definitely up there, and I wasn't disappointed,
Yeah.
I guess.
So anyway, the hero at the king's court is forced to wrestle with a Blåmother that the king seems to own. And then the
Okay.
Blåmother is unleashed upon the hero like some kind of like a beast onto a gladiator.
Yeah.
And the fight starts, and then the Blåmother is described in the most awful terms. They scream, they froth at mouth, they don't seem to possess any language. They are called black as pitch and blue as hell, and they are always humongous and far stronger than the hero. But the hero has been warned beforehand, so he has a special armor or other equipment that he can use to survive. And in the end, he manages to defeat this inhuman monster, which still obviously is given a modicum of humanity within the narrative. Like, this is a humanoid person, and it is definitely called a man, but at the same time, the language sort of betrays the true intention in that they use descriptors that are of neutral chromatic sex, which is really uncommon in Iceland at all. So you say, this does not look like a man to me. It looks more like a troll.
Oh.
And then, we also get to see into the minds of the crowd gathered around the fight. And the crowd is thinking how awful it is to unleash a troll upon such a noble person.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah.
It seemed, I guess, in my mind, it feels more like they're treated like animals in a sense, kind of bringing as a gift in the sense, I assume, or I know we spoke about before, I can't remember one episode where, exotic animals would be brought as a, like, look at this cool thing that I got, because it's a sign of affluence, isn't it? It's a sign of success, I guess. If you have this thing that nobody else has, then it's kind of, look at how good I'm doing. And then again, even being able to put one, I hate using the word one, but it like into a fight that you can afford to do that. You have the resources to even do that. That's a sign of dominance, isn't it? But it seems like it's just a treatment as like a beast rather than a human.
And now I have a twist to the story that if anybody would be unconvinced that what I just described is is a racist narrative, then we have exactly the same narrative in 19th century folklore. And we have lots of these, always the same story, different people that this happens to. All of these people have names, like Ingjaldur on Kálfafellsströnd. So this is a person called Ingjaldur, and we know exactly where he lived. But now the story takes place in some Icelandic fishing village, like Eyrarbakki. And this is tremendously hilarious to everybody who's ever been to Eyrarbakki. And so now this person who is just a regular Icelandic bumpkin, like we all used to be and still are, he goes to the docks to get work to unload a ship, and then he tests his strength against the either the merchant or the captain, and shows off stupidly, angering the powerful person who happens to have a Blåmenn in his hold.
Oh, great.
And then he unleashes that Blåmenn on the hero, who has also been pre-warned about this, and he defeats him and kills him, like in Eirarbakki by the docks. And then also this antagonist has a dog. He also unleashes the dog on the hero, and they are described exactly the same way, like just one huge gaping gob, frothing, screaming, and the hero usually stabs both in the throat, like into the mouth and down into the throat.
Oh, okay, yeah.
So dog and Blåmenn in 19th century folklore, and by this time in history, the word Blåmenn only means one thing, and that is black African.
Right.
And so,
right.
So,
and now we have the
in summary, racism.
Yes, and we even have the colonial element right there, right now. So,
Okay. Do we know why this term comes about? Is it because, again, I'm trying to remove myself from my modern understanding of racism, and I mean, anybody who isn't racist, I think, struggles to put themselves in the mind of those people who are. So it's difficult to do anyway. But then to put yourselves back in time and do that is also equally more difficult. Yeah, is it just a case of? I would argue that pretty much all racism is a form of just ignorance and misunderstanding and not understanding the other. And I guess I'm getting back to, do we know like why this term comes about? Why there is this opinion? Is it simply that they just don't understand this, so they see it as less than? Because that's unfortunately what a lot of people tend to do, is they just don't understand this thing over there that looks, they look different, their culture's different, so we kind of get scared by it and go, well, kill it, unfortunately, or like capture it. That kind of opinion rather than maybe learn from it.
Sadly, I have a far more sinister theory, and because at least in the medieval texts, I don't think there is any misunderstanding or ignorance. I think that they are creating others to magnify their own importance, and this is actually a really complicated theory. Then this is pretty much what my entire PhD thesis was about: how you create monsters to elevate yourself. And there's one particular reason why Icelanders would have wanted to do so. If we and this goes back to these world maps here that are. Yeah, I wish I had an active slideshow. Like, I'm always thinking like a classroom teacher.
No, I know what you mean.
So they're often circular, these maps, and then they are divided by a T inside, and so the upper half is Asia, and then you have Europe and Africa in the smaller bits, and in the direct center of the map you have Jerusalem, because that's the place that is closest to God, and that's where the this goes back into, like, medieval people are lumping together several ancient theories, like, for instance, the climate theory, that harsh climates create harsh and evil people, and mild climates create, like,
wimps.
Well, God-fearing, civilized, wonderful people.
Oh, okay.
And
My bad.
and so if up in the north you would have the frigid, white, soulless, cannibalistic monsters like myself. And then in the way down south you would have the burnt by the sun, black, cannibalistic people. And then in the center, everybody European, and Middle Eastern, perfect people, except of course for the
That-
Arabs,
Yeah.
So, because this always confuses me, I guess, because the people in Jerusalem would not have been white like
No.
we are. And so that's kind of where my hang up
Yeah,
is.
well, this works because most people never went to Jerusalem, and and then of course those who did in the Middle Ages, you would already have by the time that Icelanders are writing, we have Europeans controlling that city, and
How convenient.
yeah, exactly, and so the world maps, what they also do is that they show the monsters in these affected areas. And then they show the biblical narratives in the proper places. Like on these maps, you often have Moses getting the tablets, and you can find the Ark of Noah on top of Mount Sinai, and all these different things.
Mm-hmm.
And then when you think about it in these terms, Iceland isn't even on the maps. They're so far out. So how monsters would they be? And they need to really show that they are truly European and great. So they start making up narratives that they are descendants from Trojans and all that kind of stuff. And then the Vinland narratives conveniently managed to find an even more remote place from Iceland where there are truly monsters, which are one-legged people and Native Americans. But when they are writing the Vinland sagas, we have this in several manuscripts. Icelandic scholars thought that Vinland was a peninsula of Western Africa because
Okay.
because it was impossible for there to exist a fourth continent. That goes
Yeah.
against biblical truth.
Yeah, and I guess if you don't understand, or if you don't know it's there, you're just going to kind of attribute it to what is there. I mean, even I guess Columbus did the same thing when they
Yeah.
landed. They thought they were in like India.
Yeah, exactly. And so all these things come together in such a way that it becomes the most important thing to show how truly Christian you are. And for instance, there's
So it's important for Iceland not to be part of kind of the othered areas of
Yeah.
the map.
So was it? So it seems as though it was othered in both directions to start with. You had like you said, the darker skinned cannibals to the south, but then even so the lighter skin were also, were they, I guess, would they have been demonized in the same way as Blåmenn originally, but
Yeah.
then I guess as European cultures got bigger and started writing these down, they've kind of got rid of that aspect
Yes,
and looked
exactly.
put it all onto the other.
Yeah, and then the others in the north, they dwindle down into Sami people and other like nomadic cultures in Karelia, Siberia, these areas. And so yeah, one of my PhD students is writing a thesis on the dehumanization of Fennoscandic peoples, and so that's part of the bigger project on peripheral humanity.
Mm-hmm.
And um, so yeah, I think truly that, I mean, there's another indication for why Icelanders would have been concerned about this. It's how others write about Iceland, and usually people get it pretty much right. That it's Icelanders have become famous for being a great book manufacturing country, and
Mm-hmm.
that they are really pious and truly great Christians. But at the same time, they are um, savages living in, almost in holes in the ground and things like that, and they don't
Mm.
bathe and they eat disgusting things, and they live up in the frigid north and all that. And so they want to sort of prove that they are far better than that. And I think that is very sinister and not based on any sort of misunderstanding or lack of knowledge how they dehumanize others. I think it's quite against their better knowledge, really.
So it's almost like a conscious tactical choice in a way.
Yeah,
It's the classic I am going to make sure that I step on someone else so that I am not stepped
yeah.
on.
And then we find some
Yes.
contradictions in this. So it's like uh, from the earliest days when Europeans discovered the existence of Muslims, they started to describe them as having dog heads and just barking at each other. And they are then, so by doing that, they are taking a figure already written about by Pliny in the first century, the Kinokephali, the dog heads, and now they are
Mm-hmm.
just lumping them together with Muslims, and we still have this kind of uh, racist slurs thrown at people of Middle Eastern origins, calling them dogs. Um, but at the same time, we also have the legend of Saint Christopher. In some versions, he is a dog-headed person. So he was not originally uh, a proper white European, but his example shows that you can christen even the beasts.
Mm.
This is a little off topic, but I just come to my little head, and I wonder if you know the answer or not, because obviously in Muslim culture, I think dogs are pretty haram. Is that the right word? Like they're not seen favorably. They're seen as like a dirty creature. It, is that linked to this that they used to be called dog-headed? So maybe, like, I was wondering whether that term was used because they had a dislike for dogs and saw them to be unclean, so they use that term as a way
Mm,
to kind of dehumanize them, or did that because they were called it? Did they then get the dislike or their opinions on dogs from that after?
mm. I'm not sure, but um, there is this great book by Sophia Rose Ariana that's called "The Muslim in Western Imagination," and so she goes through the entire history of how Muslims have been viewed and received in Europe until the modern days. And she probably has an opinion on this, but I can't remember it at the moment.
Mm, okay.
But at least we do know that these dog-headed people are mentioned as early as Herodotus in the 5th century BC. Uh,
Okay. Mm,
and he is not really um, easily sold on these monsters that he describes. He says, I cannot attest to this, but I mean, this is what people have told me, and I'll just, don't take my word for it, But
Mm-hmm.
he's definitely still passing it on because he thinks it's interesting. And then when Pliny starts writing about this 500 years later or so, for him this is quite literal. And then when Saint Augustine is writing his most influential works in 5th century, I think it was, he then is responding to these stories of the ancients. Like, what do we think about these so-called dog-headed people, or those who don't even have heads but faces in their chests? And so he makes an argument that one, he can't claim that these exist, but if they exist, and if they are human, that means that they must be the offspring of Adam. And if they exist and they're not human, then they must be created by God, because nothing can exist outside of his creation. And I think it's a pretty solid argument for a Catholic, but it sort of backfired because he wasn't trying to prove their existence. But then when the 7th century comes and Saint Isidore is writing his stuff, veritable bestseller in the Middle Ages, the etymologies, really well known in Iceland and elsewhere. He takes this argument as a confirmation of the existence of these monsters. And so now we know that even the dog-headed people, they do exist, and they are created by God, but we are not certain whether they are human or not. And then all of a sudden we have this new thing coming from the East, this new bastardization of our religion called Islam, and these must be the dog-headed people or something like that. This might be the train of thought. I can't verify that at present, but I think that it wouldn't be so far-fetched to link these together.
But I will say, I just did a quick search, and when it comes to, again, I'm not Muslim, so I can't say any of this in practice, but I have spoke to some friends about this earlier, so I just double checked if this was correct. And I do think that this is, the question you brought up, Dan, seems to be a typical instance of like correlation and not causality. So it seems that when it comes to keeping pets within some Islamic traditions, is not related to this at all, but it comes down to the concept of hygiene.
Okay.
That a lot of or I wouldn't say a lot, some Islamic traditions view it as unhygienic to keep a dog, and so it's not haram, but it shouldn't be done because of hygiene. So it goes into more theological, Quran-based things.
Okay.
Which makes it an even greater insult to call these very people dogs. And then, if I remember correctly, Ariana does point out in her book that Muslims did refer to us in the exact same way.
Okay.
So, because we often forget the other side, the dehumanized, they often also have their own means of dehumanizing the other.
Yeah.
It's about like which side do you descend from? So which sources are you reading? Type thing.
Oh, I'm sure there's plenty that go the other way as well. Okay, I have a few questions I want to get to before we end up wrapping up. And I think I've got maybe 3 if I can remember them, and the ones that I think that would be good to cover.
Do you want me to keep count, Dan? Like
I can count to 3. I think.
You think? Okay, cool.
Firstly, this all is coming from a Christian kind of standpoint and influence. Do we know what the pre-Christian people in Scandinavia would have thought? Would they have had these similar opinions? Would they use the same words? Is it possible to even know? Because obviously everything's written down by the Christians. What would we know?
Well, I think that I think 2 things. First, we do know that the pre-Christians did not have access to all this information from Europe and from the ancients about how this proliferation of monsters all over the world, and so they probably weren't thinking as much about the world in the same terms. But then we also have some really interesting stories in the mythology describing a worldview that is still in so many ways similar. So we have these evil black people controlling the fire, and then we have in Ríkstula, which actually is, I think, the manuscript provenance of that is quite young. Sadly, I would like to have a really old Ríkstula, but that describes a really Aristotelian idea that we have the forefathers and mothers of the different classes of people, and amongst them are the slaves, and they are dark, if not even black. And this is exactly, or quite similar to how Aristotle described humanity is divided into two kinds of people: the Greeks and the slaves.
Lovely.
So I do think that they had sort of their own ideas of the inferior, and I think they were often linked with dark things. And of course, death in Old Norse is always linked with the color blue, which is also linked heavily with the supernatural. And I mean, Hel has half a blue face, and Surtur, the giant fire being that we don't really know anything about, except that he, is really interested in burning us all, which is kind of cool in a way.
Yeah.
And there are these so-called, dark elves that are likened to maggots in the ground, but the sad thing is that we don't really know much about the meaning behind these things because the sources are scant. But at the same time, everybody who studies ancient Greek or Roman mythology, they really envy us a lot because their situation is far worse than ours.
Yeah. Okay.
Wait, that got me curious. In what sense?
Both. It's mainly we don't have any complete mythology. We have different texts describing things that have to be sort of lumped together to create a whole mythology. And at the same time, the manuscript preservation of ancient text is abysmal.
Right.
And so we often have. I think that when I got into the Old Norse studies, and everybody was thinking like this manuscript is this old, and that means this, and so we have all these different problems related to that. But then we pick up a book of Greek mythology, and we are not thinking about the manuscripts anymore. Same thing with Bible studies. That's also ridiculously complicated.
Yep, that's true. Okay, I get what you mean. Yeah.
Okay.
That is true.
One of the other questions was, do we see any positive uses of the word? Because I've often seen people claiming that they would be, a dark-skinned Viking, or people they would fight together, and that kind of thing. Are there any cases of that we see where it's not purely just a negative thing? And are they still called Blåmenn, or is there another word for that if there is a more positive line?
I really like that question because the answer is yes. And although it gets a bit complicated again because
that isn't everything.
It always does.
Yeah. So there's in particular, there's Mau's saga, which which has the hero um, disguise himself as the so-called half-colored man. So half of his face is black and the other half is white. And he describes his appearance so that, like, yes, my mother was from Blåmenn, but my father was from, I can't remember where, and so that's why I am the half-colored man, and that is his entire name. He doesn't have another name, but he is considered to be the most noble prince from Blåland. Even though
Is that because he's half white?
I don't know. We also have other instances of some people being royalty from Blåland being considered to be noble people. So yeah, we do have those instances, and then we have also a case where it's absolutely ambivalent, almost ambivalent, because this is in the saga of Charlemagne, and there's this evil advisor to a king who wishes to bet the queen, and she will not have it. And in anger, he goes and he drugs her and strips her and puts her into bed. And then he goes out and he finds a Blåmother, a young boy, and he offers him food and comfort in the palace. And so the young boy eagerly follows him, where he drugs him, strips him, and puts him into bed with the queen. And then he calls on the king, like, "Oh, look what your queen is doing!" And then the king, in anger, he beheads the poor boy. And at that exact same moment, all of the candles in the room just lit up. Like, it's almost like a holy moment. Like, the boy has been martyred, and the king realizes that this is an evil deed that he has committed and has his advisors killed. So it doesn't really matter that the boy is black, but at the same time they keep repeating that he is black.
Okay.
But he is absolutely just an innocent human, definitely a human boy.
Okay. And I'm trying to think. I had a third one, but I don't know. I think I've forgotten it. I think it was because Blåmenn. Am I right in thinking that Blau means blue? And where does that come from?
That's also another complicated one. We have some excellent scholars like Kirsten Wolf writing extensively about colors in Old Norse and what they mean, and she has written about the difference between blue and black, and it's really complicated, and I don't think that we can really find a systematic enough use to be absolutely certain. But blue seems to be more associated with fabrics, if I remember correctly, and also with the supernatural. And black would maybe be more brownish a color. But another example is if you read the Odyssey by Homer, you'll notice that the colors are psychedelic almost. And they do not describe the colors that we would use, the same terms that we would use today. And there are many theories about why that is, but so this complicates matters more. And another thing that we tend to forget, especially those of us who are Icelandic and like to see ourselves as native speakers, as it were, of Old Norse, which we are not, though we like to think. Then we forget to think about how words have changed their meaning throughout time. And so I'm really cautious about the meaning of blue, although I do have to really dive into it at some point.
Yeah. Wonderful. Okay. Let's wrap up the main show, and then we'll do a little quick Q&A with the patrons. We'll keep you maybe another 15, 20 minutes, and we'll ask you questions. There's one that I saw that I do want to get to, and I'm going to tease it here for anybody that's just listening. And it was to do with tattoos. And I'm sure you've heard it and seen it about whether the term Blåmenn could be talking about the color of tattoos and the blue color that I guess black tattoos tend to go after age and those things. So we'll get into that because that's an interesting one. That's a theory I've heard quite often when it comes to where this term Blåmenn may have come from. It feels like you answered it earlier on, and it's definitely not. But we'll still get to it. So if you want to hear that and the rest of the Q&A, pop over to our Patreon, Patreon.com/Nordic Mythology Podcast. Starts from £3 a month, and you get every bonus episode that we do on there. With the Viking smut that we're going to get to after this, which is just like I say, it's a bit of fun, a bit of lighthearted. Me, Mags, and Claire are going to look at some literature and give our thoughts. So yeah, Arngrimur, thank you so much for coming back and your time. Is there anywhere that you want to send people on a level where they can read your work, see your work? I saw that have you deleted your academia now?
Yeah.
I brought it up on here the other day, actually, because I saw your post about the AI.
Yeah. I deleted him. I deleted my page and told them why. It was actually kind of interesting. Unlike Facebook, they were not like, "Oh, please don't, please don't." It's just bloop, gone. But people can go on my. I have a webpage, avidalin.com, and I have links to some of my work there, and I will silently be adding some more, hopefully without copyright holders finding out about it.
Okay. If anybody that didn't hear before, on the other episode, Academia are creating their own podcasts, AI podcasts from scholars' articles, which is a problematic thing because
without the scholars in question's consent being the heavy thing.
Yeah, exactly.
Here.
They just tell you, "Hey, we made a podcast from your work.
Be happy about it." All right, Mags, where can people find you?
They can find me on Instagram at Archeomags with a K.
And for me, it's Daniel_Farrand1, Horns of Odin for the business. And as I said before, Nordic Mythology Podcast across the board, Facebook, YouTube. If you want to watch the episodes, pop over there, hit the like, subscribe, bell button, all those little things you have to do to find out when we put a new video out. Other than that, thank you very much.
Thank you.